Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are. It's great to be here at the Urban Disasters Vulnerability and Resilience in the Pandemic session, where we're looking at the paradox of cities, housing, and shelter for the poor in post-disaster context in the African continent. I'm Basirat Oyalowo from the University of Lagos, the Center for Housing and Sustainable Development. I'm glad to be here. In framing this presentation and looking at this issue, I tried to focus on three major questions, which is how prepared are African cities towards housing needs amplified by disasters, and how the responses vary across Africa, and what we can learn from this. So my source documents for this presentation are the city resilience strategies of Accra, Addis Ababa, Lagos, and Cape Town. These are 4 cities in Africa, as well as the World Disasters Report 2020. And I would like to mention a little about the city resilience strategies. The Rockefeller Foundation pioneered the 100 Resilient Cities movement, and used its funds to support cities in creating resilient strategies that could address the shocks and stresses that impact on cities. The strategies were drawn up through stakeholder meetings and research, and a lot of interviews with people within each city. There are about 10 African cities in the network, and out of which I've chosen 4 spread across Africa in order to identify and to engage with it, with what they are planning in terms of mitigating against these disasters, and providing support for those that have been affected, to ensure that the city bounces back should there be any episode of natural or man-made disaster. We're looking at climate disasters and COVID-19, and what the world has experienced in the last decades. It's been a period of intense coping with all kinds of disasters, some of which are natural, some of which are, as a result of anthropogenic activities. The impact has been very significant, as the little ones in each village and in each city and each country, when they come together to be very, very significant around the world, where the World Disaster Report tells us that over 1.7 billion people around the world have been affected by climate and weather-related disasters during the past decade. That's quite astounding, and it's very clear that the need to be better prepared is very, very urgent. The housing dimension in all of this can be viewed in 2 ways. We can look at the qualitative dimension and the quantitative dimension. By qualitative, I mean in terms of housing condition for those whose homes have been damaged by disasters such as storms and fire and others, as there would be a need to improve their housing quality. It might mean putting up roofs, building up walls, and putting up toilets and baths and things like that, to ensure that they are actually safe and protected from other issues such as infectious diseases, which could also arise as an aftermath of a disaster. Then there will probably be need to build new housing for those whose homes have been completely destroyed. And here we're talking about quantitative, which means that we have to increase the quantity of homes. And of course, there's the need to care for those who do not even have homes. So these are the housing dimensions. So in going forward, I examined the resilience strategies of these 4 African cities trying to see exactly what they have in stock in terms of preparing for post-disaster housing needs. Here is a little bit about each of the cities. All of them are really fast-rising cities. They are of significant importance in their region, and they have significant population, a lot of diversity in there, from Accra to Addis Ababa in East Africa. Accra is in West Africa, Lagos is in West Africa, and Cape Town in South Africa. So starting with the Accra resilience strategies, there is a lot in there about ensuring that the city is better protected in terms of waste management and having a strategic plan for waste management, because it's discovered that a lot of the flooding disasters occur due to improper disposal of waste. There are plans to upgrade selected informal settlements and to also design and implement flood hazard land management guidelines with residents. In Addis Ababa, there is a strategy to have a resilience lens to the city's affordable housing program. A lot of the Addis Ababa resilience strategy actually responds to some of the compelling housing needs in the city. And there is a plan to establish strategy and legal framework for citywide disaster risk management, as well as community-based resilience in collaboration with community care coalitions. Lagos, I was involved in the Lagos resilience strategy, and there are plans to increase access to affordable housing, to strengthen the Lagos Urban Renewal Program, as well as community participatory flood management schemes. For Cape Town's resilience strategy came after a drought episode, which lasted close to over 3 years, I think, and it was important because they were coming from, they were preparing the strategy from having experienced the kind of issue that could actually put people at, and actually did put the economy and the people at significant risk. So they were looking at innovating for improved conditions, service delivery, and well-being in several informal settlements, as well as co-designing for upgrades, and then flood prevention capital projects. Importantly, they looked at using smart technology and predictive analytics to inform pre- and post-disaster planning, as well as having insurance products to cater for catastrophic shock events, as well as lobbying for increased budget flexibility to cater for shock events. So in all of this, and against the backdrop of the issues that bring these cities together in terms of population diversity, inequality, and post-apartheid issues, as well as rapid migration from other cities within the country, we find that, of course, responses to post-disaster planning actually varied based on the city context. And I found that, where I began to look at the issues of paradoxes, I found that there were strategies to prevent housing loss due to future envisaged disasters. And that is where some cities proposed having, more resilient and weatherproof building materials. And there were strategies that sought to cushion the loss of housing due to future disasters, and some of these included affordable housing construction. But when we now look at strategies that responded to housing loss due to past disasters, we find that there's a little bit of disconnection in that area. These cities did not actually look at post-disaster housing need. It's all about preparing for what might eventually not happen. But what about when it does happen? How do you solve the housing need that arises beyond housing construction? How do you focus to bring out those that are really in need of housing? So there is a kind of pullback there. I didn't really find so much going on in that area. Then what about strategies that catered for those with housing already, the informal and the formal, compared to those that would support those with, with housing need, post-disaster context? So I found that most of the strategies also catered for those that already have housing. These are people that are already living in one kind, or whether it's informal or formal, they already have a means of satisfying their housing need. But they're really, the focus on those that are homeless now is not really spelled out and is not really clear. So would we say that resilience strategy, the resilience planning is more responsive to those that already have compared to those that do not have? Then there's the resilience planning and extant practices. So even within the strategy, some of the current policies of the cities are not incorporated into the strategy, which is meant to actually respond to housing needs. So for instance, I know that the Lagos state government has a resettlement housing program where it should resettle those that have been displaced, but there was no mention of this in the resilience strategy. So then it also brings us to the question of the efficacy of the planning instrument, and of course disaster planning. We can actually have a nice, beautiful looking plan, but what do we do to actually ensure that we do not perpetuate inequalities in implementation? Because where you don't cater for people that do not have, then when a disaster occurs, they are thrown into a more vulnerable position. So what can be done? So there is a need to actually, delve into that database post-disaster planning that focuses on specific needs of specific groups of people within the city. And for that to happen, there needs to be a composite data, collection pre-disaster, which recognizes the existence of these people and can also make arrangements for their care after an episode of natural disasters or even a pandemic. The community-based response systems, the literature tells us that when communities are engaged in post-disaster planning and mitigation and implementation, it is far more responsive, because within the community, they know those who housing circumstances are really there. They know the homeless, they know the people that are wandering, they know the people that are actually vulnerable. So within each community, plans should be made and communities should be supported to have shelters that can take care of people that are both homeless or rendered homeless due to the disaster. The human rights-based approach to address systematic inequalities. At the times of, at the aftermath of disasters, actually, let us see just how unequal the society is. And the same is true for the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw marked differences in how developed countries and developing countries, and within each city, the rich and the poor, the access to healthcare and all of that actually came to focus. So if cities were to adopt a human rights-based approach to addressing inequalities, then the housing issue can also be brought together, can be brought into that wider framework, and vulnerable peoples can, be assisted as a question of their rights to life and decent living, in this way. Then, of course, the role of local governments. There is a lot undone for local governments and local municipalities, and it's not just in the area of disaster planning, but also in the area of economic development and employment and all. Local governments need to be strengthened as they are closer to the communities, and so they need to be very, taking, they need very involved in post-disaster housing provision. Then, of course, there is the funding. And in the Cape Town example, we found that quite a lot of energy was put into creating avenues for funding, such as lobbying for budget flexibility so that the city can respond quickly to episodes of disasters, and also having insurance products that can support individuals and households in terms of scaling back. And this is very important when we look at the housing, the intensiveness of funding that is required to even access housing. So with all of these, and but the truth is that it's a good thing, after all said and done, that these cities already have in view a plan or a strategy to address natural and man-made disasters, and to ensure that their cities are actually protected from shocks and stresses that can affect people in there. I think what is needed going forward is to recognize all strata of the community, of strata of the city, and to recognize their needs and their importance and their contribution to the economic and sustainability of the city. In this way, they can all be catered for, in post-disaster planning. So I thank you for listening, and I'm open to questions and contributions. Thank you.